In August of 2012, a research team helmed by Quentin Atkinson of the University of Auckland in New Zealand utilized certain algorithmic methods which analyzed phonetics from over 100 ancient and modern-day languages. Their methods were similar to tracing evolutionary biology by starting at the branches of the family tree and finding the root. Their goal was to figure out if all the languages in the world derived from the same area. In an interview with NPR, Quentin explained how they gathered this data.
What we use are what are called cognates. These are words that show similar form that indicates that they're related via common ancestry. Over 6,000 across the 200 meanings in 100 languages. And from that, we can build, it's our data matrix, we call it. And so if you imagine down the left-hand side of the data matrix, you've got all your languages, and then along the top of the data matrix, you've got all the possible cognates that we've identified. And you fill in that matrix by putting a 0 if that language has doesn't have the cognate, and a 1 if the language does have that cognate. And if you fill that in for all the cognates, you get this sequence of 1s and 0s for each language. And it's a bit like having a sequence of DNA for each language. And that's the data that we then input into our analysis.
Through their research, they pinned down the 8 millennia-old origin of the largest global language ever created. They also determined all of these languages began in one area.
There are 2 competing theories for where these languages came from. The first theory was put forward by Maria Gimbutas, an archaeologist, and she argued the languages spread out from the Russian steppes region about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, and that's linked to archaeological evidence for an expansion at that time. The alternative theory is that the languages spread much earlier from Anatolia, what is now Turkey.
This interesting study done by Atkinson relates to an ancient story about the Tower of Babel in the Hebrew Bible. In Genesis 11, 1 through 9, it states, "Everyone on earth once spoke the same language. As people migrated east, they settled in the land of Shinar."
For those who are not familiar with it, the Tower of Babel is a biblical story about the idea of a group of people who were all centered in their civilization around a tower, and that this tower somehow allowed them to all have the same language and to all be able to speak with one another. Then the legend reports that there is some sort of destruction of the tower, and then the aftermath of this happening, that the people themselves were scattered and that they no longer could speak the same tongue or the same language, and thus we became confused. It's sort of like a fall from grace type of story. You have to understand that there is a very significant difference between how the scholarship on ancient civilizations is seen in the open, unclassified world, as opposed to how it is being seen within the secret government and the military-industrial complex. They are going back and they are looking at every single mythology they can find, and they are asking questions which need to have scientific answers. One of the questions that they ask is, what the heck was the Tower of Babel? They have started to learn that no matter what the ancient mythology is, you dig deep enough, you double click on it, and you find out, wait a minute, there's something here that suggests this is not a myth. So it's very interesting to note that in 1899, in the town of Sippar, there was a very interesting stone tablet that was found right near where Babylon was originally located. And it actually has an X marks the spot treasure map type of derivation of the location of the Tower of Babel, allegedly. Now what's interesting about this is that the Tower of Babel X marks the spot location is up in Turkey.
This possibly new understanding of where the Tower of Babel was located coincides nicely with Anton Parks's research of the Garden of Eden and the understanding of the language according to Sumerian texts.
Donc cette localisation de cette fameuse montagne divine.
We were able to locate the divine mountain of the Anuna gods along with their Garden of Eden, thanks to the elements found with Google Earth and Gary Zeitling from NASA. It took us straight to eastern Turkey, close to Road 5651. What can be noted in the Sumerian tablets, when they clearly speak of creating workers to serve the Anunnaki, the main geneticist is always Enki. Enki is very proud of what he is doing. However, he always has to do it in secret. And here something important occurs in the research that I've carried out. In order to be able to secretly teach values, besides from changing their genetic code, in which he probably injected things that we cannot comprehend nowadays, the gods were using a specific language in Eden, the Emion language, the language that comes from the skies, the language which comes from On. In my years of research, I understood that the Emeshah, the matrix language, was mostly used by Sumerian priestesses. The so-called Emeshah contained more particles than the languages used by the male gods. So Enki used the Emeshah, the matrix language, to encode the ancient languages we find on Earth. I think that Enki had the desire to work for the benefit of the human race, to secretly bring them knowledge. And to be able to do that, they had to use a code. So they created a linguistic code for each tribe. And I think that regularly, maybe every generation, they had to change the code to prevent the Anunnaki from finding out about the hidden knowledge.
It is interesting to note that according to Anton's research, the language that has been coded into the universe for the humans to speak is called the matrix language. In Sumerian, this means the language that the female life creators, like Tiamat, spoke. How has this coded language helped us survive against the wrath of the demiurge?
This is a crucial part of my work. I discovered that all common languages were coded from Sumerian. We can look for idioms from anywhere we want. African tribes, Native American tribes, all the way to China. When you get to the innermost part of primitive languages, you can always understand the words in Sumerian. For example, if you take the word tool in the language of an African tribe and you translate it into Sumerian, it will become the thing we use to chop wood. The idea is a code used in order to be able to communicate secretly with humans. In concrete terms, this idea of coding language and creating new ones with Sumerian syllables, this desire to be able to communicate secretly with the human race, is going to design the many different languages on Earth. Old Chinese, the Hopi, many of the ancient idioms we find in Africa or in Australia. We can find common roots with ancient German and ancient English. Enki knew for a fact that human beings would not be submissive to the gods on the whole planet, so he gifted them with the ability to make tools, and in my theory, he also wished to code human language so the gods could not understand.
Anton Park suggests that once the humans had the knowledge to survive on Earth, they sought to build their own future and escape the gods. Could there be an actual builder of this new human settlement? In the Hebrew Bible, it suggests that the builder of the Tower of Babel was the king of Shinar, and his name was Nimrod. What an interesting name for someone who defies the laws of Yahweh to create his own connection to the Creator. Could Nimrod have been the representation of the first group of humans to use the knowledge taught by Enki?
Nimrod, interesting character. He was said to have built the Tower of Babel. He went up against God himself, tried to get closer than anybody else had ever done. As a result, God struck down the Tower of Babel, and as a punishment to humanity for having attempted this act, confused the languages so that everybody couldn't understand everybody else. Is there anything more behind this story? Is there something of importance? Well, what is the Tower of Babel? And the Babylonian civilization is focused around Babylon, and Babylon is in Lower Iraq. They now see this area as the centre of reality, the centre of everything. This is the Omphalos, the axis mundi, the axis of the earth. That gravitational shift from northern Mesopotamia to southern Mesopotamia was the result of the Babylonians. This is why the ancient city of Erech is in southern Iraq, when all the old accounts say that it was the ancient name for Urfa in southeast Turkey. This is why Nimrod is associated now with Babylon and not with southeast Turkey.
The biblical story of Nimrod and his area of proposed reign happened to be in the same area that a group of ancient astrologers once resided. This group was called the Chaldeans. Could this ancient group have been practicing some of the ancient teachings by Enki?
Urfa was the stronghold of Nimrod. This was the traditional homeland of the Chaldeans. They were star worshippers. They recorded the stars. They had knowledge of the comets, knowledge of eclipses and everything like this. They were the scientists of their day. So what Abraham is trying to do is knock down their beliefs, their ideas, their mystery tradition, and install this new idea. So it is possible that what he was trying to do is to essentially kill off the wisdom tradition that had been that of the Chaldeans up to this point, and that Nimrod somehow steps in, whoever or whatever he represents, to try and prevent this from happening. But unfortunately, according to the legends, God intervenes, saves Abraham, and that's essentially the story. So yes, there is something in this. I do accept that what Abraham was trying to do is, bring in a new era that didn't need our connection with the stars. But what the implications of that is for Judaism or even Christianity, I don't know.
Could this battle between Abraham and Nimrod really be representing a battle between Enki and Enlil for the control over the human race?
What the Mesopotamian story tells us that Enki introduced contention into human speech. And there are biblical scholars who think that that was the basis then of the Tower of Babel story. Now, what's interesting though is earlier Enki was said to be the provider of wisdom. He was said to have been the one who wanted humanity to have the knowledge that would undo the gods or the control of the gods. So we have this kind of conflict now in the Mesopotamian stories. People who have really studied the Mesopotamian stories, and we're talking very good biblical scholars and Mesopotamian scholars, they're so ambivalent about the Enki figure. They say, yeah, he was said to be this great guy. He sometimes is identified with the snake in the Garden of Eden, and then he later became identified with Prometheus in the Greek version of the story, where Prometheus tries to come down and give humanity the certain knowledge that would advance them. And then the other gods come in and say, no, you can't do that. And then there are all these repercussions to humanity in dividing them up. The people in the Tower of Babel story were really anarchists who were opposing the archons. And they were saying, the heck with the archons. We're leaving, we're going to establish our own little anarchy, and we're going to move over here and build our own city, and we're going to go do things on our own.
And what was it that they were going to do their way? Just 8 miles north of the ancient city of Urfa is another famous site known as Göbekli Tepe. All that is revealed is the top of what could have been a great tower of sorts. 95% of the site remains below ground to be uncovered. Could the ancient humans have gathered here to use their knowledge of the universe?
Göbekli Tepe is the oldest stone circle complex in the world. If you can imagine Stonehenge in England and transpose it onto the top of a mountaintop in southeast Turkey, and then multiply it by at least 20 times, and then cover the stones with beautiful carvings of animals and representations of abstract humans, and give them T-shaped tops. The fact is that Göbekli Tepe is in northern Mesopotamia. This is clearly the cradle of civilization in this area. This is where the Neolithic Revolution began. This is where even the archaeologist Klaus Schmidt at Göbekli Tepe, who discovered the site, suggests that the Anunnaki had their power base. It's clearly that a lot of things started here.
A site only becomes sacred upon the foundations of many, many old temples. Göbekli Tepe is one great example. It's an entire artificial hill. The clue is actually in the name, the original name. It means Potbelly Hill, or the Hill of the Navel. in its true context, which to me tells me that it's a navel of the earth, and like so many other navels of the earth around the world, it's a place where the rules of physics work in a certain way that allows you communication with other levels of reality.
The whole evolution of language in the human Homo sapiens sapien brain has been cultivated, manipulated, and managed by technologies that could influence the human brain's development of language. And that when we read about the Tower of Babel being a time when the human population had one language, had one thought system, if it's true that there have been competing geopolitical territorial forces of competing non-humans on this planet, and that there was a time when humans were unified, that would not have been a good step for the competing non-humans. And it could very well be the Tower of Babel story was one of those moments where humans had been homogenized and something did not want that homogeneity in human thought, humans together, humans working as a group. And that from the outside, there was a disruption in what, for just a brief moment, may have been a unification in thought without war or conflict of human beings.
Unification, a dangerous thing to have if you plan to rule over a people. But could this unification have been an actual tower, or just an ancient location where people gathered to exchange knowledge? A location in which they could communicate important information.
Babylon is actually an old Sumerian word which means gate of God, which for me, in my understanding of the ancient mysteries, tells me everything I need to know. Anything referred to as a gate of God or a navel of the earth is usually a sort of an energetic hotspot where the laws of physics are slightly different, or just so, that allows you to step through a portal into another level of existence. For me, the Tower of Babel essentially represents the levels of attainment of knowledge that gets you to rise slowly ever upwards towards the mind of God. The summit, of course, being the connection or the interchange between the physical and the non-physical. The way that they communicated in the old days was through metaphor, and the more we get into the historical era, the more we mistake the metaphor for reality.
In one of the traditions, Enlil just gets really annoyed because of the noise humanity's making. And that just noise is too much. Let's just get rid of these horrible little things. But Enki doesn't want to go that route. Humanity are his creatures, and his project is to bring wisdom and understanding to humanity. And I think there's a beautiful message hidden beneath that symbolism.
Some experts like Jack Carey believe the story of the Tower of Babel is not just the location that offered a gateway to the gods, but a location that humans created, a frequency that could defy the current reality.
I believe absolutely that the Tower of Babel was a center where humans were being taught divine knowledge, and chief among those secrets was the power of the spoken word. And that they were being taught a language which was forbidden by the leadership of this extraterrestrial intelligence to teach them. Imagine a species that has developed a language that is so potent that it literally uses the laws of harmonic resonance in order to create instantaneous change in your surroundings. That's what they were being taught. And it was strictly forbidden. That the leadership looked down and said, what, you're teaching this invention of ours? How to use the most potent weapon that we have, which is our speech, to create change. How is that going to turn out? You know? And this battle between Enki and Enlil that are claimed to have been in charge of the planet may have been the result of why that center was actually destroyed. At some point, Enlil was very, very irritated with the fact that humans were being taught all of these things. These secrets were all considered to be forbidden. Chief among those is the secret of a language that allows you to create change in reality at will. The construction of words using syllables that exhibit frequencies that can literally cause a stone to float in midair by speaking a word. That's the kind of power that they possessed. Sound causes change in your surroundings because of its natural relationship with the rest of creation. A word is no less valuable in creation than a rock sitting there. They were all created by the same laws. And the fact that you're able to make a sound is something that is a universal present. Let's call it that. It was bestowed upon us by the creator of this entire universe. It's almost as though not only is every single physical object in our reality connected with all of this, but yes, because we're a creation of the same thing, we're able to make these vibrations with our bodies. And in some occult groups, they call them barbarous names of incantations. They have all of these different sacred words that supposedly if you speak, let's say in a ceremony, it will cause a particular kind of change. That's tied into this whole idea of harmonic resonance, and our bodies vibrate to these same frequencies, and therefore our words vibrate to the same frequencies. So yeah, it's all tied together in one big, beautiful universe.
If the humans were able to control matter by using a language that changed frequency, could Göbekli Tepe have been used to harness this frequency?
I think of Göbekli Tepe. I think of other monuments that were purposely buried, maybe because they were too powerful, maybe because the creatures that built them didn't want us to destroy ourselves with that technology. That maybe those areas, if you go deep enough, have the kind of rock strata necessary in order to cause these vibrational frequencies to occur.
Is it possible that Enki tried to unify the ancient humans through knowledge, but in order to survive the wrath of Enlil, humans had to scatter throughout the globe using their coded cognates? Are these the same cognates that Atkinson has been piecing together?
When we look at the ancient descriptions of the Tower of Babel, for me, I look at it as a scientist from the physical evidence. The common theme that weaves them together when they talk about the tower is that it was a warning to humankind of our use of knowledge.
Some experts like Jonathan Young believe our path to returning to unification is an individual journey.
Let me speak to guilt for a moment, that leaving these paradise stories was our fault, leaving the Garden of Eden or the fall of the Tower of Babel, that we had something good that we messed up through our mistake. This is psychotherapy 101. This is blaming ourselves for something that was larger than we were. To distribute people around in different geographical locations with different languages speaks to the diversity of humanity, and in a way is respectful that there are many different cultures. This is, on an individual level, what is called the polyvocal quality of psychology. We have many energies, desires, agendas, voices, and we're struggling to pull that all together. This is personal work. Collectively, we have many voices in a community or in a nation. After all, there probably isn't just one path to transcendence. There are as many as there are seekers, and this is a story of the many.
But actually, I think the ancient Egyptians touched on a fundamental truth, which is each one of us, every minute of every day, are constantly making choices between good and evil. They may be very small choices. In some cases, if you're dealing with a president of a major nation, that person's choices between good and evil may have huge implications for everybody else, but we're all playing the same game. We're all having to make those choices, and those choices add up to the structure of our lives.
Could this structure have been coded in our universe and in our language to help us understand our purpose? reporter Linda Moulton Howe believes that whatever the humans had tapped into at Göbekli Tepe, they knew that they had something powerful. They had to hide it and disappear.
Whoever built Göbekli Tepe, the fact that they buried that very important 30 acres of these rings of all of these limestone columns meant something knew that something potentially destructive to the whole planet. That's the key. Potentially destructive to the whole planet. And they didn't want Göbekli Tepe destroyed.
Could certain humans have buried Göbekli Tepe because a bigger catastrophe was about to happen that would wipe out any trace of this knowledge?
Then comes the flood. The cataclysm wipes everything out, but that knowledge persists through the flood. And after the flood, they are again offering the gifts of civilization to mankind.
Up next, was the flood the next attempt to destroy the knowledge of the gods?